Welcome, everybody, to this next edition of the Interactive Dialogue Series presented by Dorsey and Whitney. We're super excited that you could be here today to hear about a very interesting topic in our food, agribusiness, and beverages industry space, namely the ag tech landscape today, tomorrow, and the future. A couple of housekeeping points for those of you who are listening in. You need to connect with us in two ways. First is to log in to the webinar, and then in addition, call in to the 800 number that is there on the right-hand side of the screen. And if you're sitting next to somebody who is asking, why can't I hear anything, then nudge them and remind them that they need to log in to the presentation as well through the phone. I'll be, when you're online, you'll see a series of panes on the left-hand side of the screen, and one of those is a participant chat pane. For those who are listening in, I do encourage you to ask questions throughout the program, and I'll be monitoring those questions, and we'll weave them into the questions that we ask George in the course of the presentation. So if you would like to keep a question confidential, just put something like that in the note itself. Otherwise, I might mention your name or the name of a company or the like in regards to a specific question. But if you'd like me to keep it confidential, I'm of course happy to do that. So today's program is a little bit different than other types of webinars. What we try to do in the Interactive Dialogue series is to really take a topic and explore it through an interview of somebody who's a true expert in the field. So rather than having 50 or 60 slides that we cram through the internet and talk through, this is intended to be more of a back and forth discussion with somebody who really knows what they're talking about. And I'm delighted to have an opportunity to interview somebody who's definitely an expert in the field on this particular topic today, as I'll describe George in just a moment. My name is Mike Droke. I'm a senior partner in the Food, Agriculture, and Cooperatives industry group here at Dorsey and Whitney. Dorsey, for those who aren't familiar, is a law firm based in Minneapolis with about 600 lawyers around the firm in 20 practice offices throughout the U.S., Canada, Asia, and Europe. And we have, among other industry groups, a very strong food, beverages, and agribusiness practice that comprises about 250 lawyers, including myself and many colleagues who do a whole variety of things, everything from merger and acquisition to regulatory advice to technology, and labor and employment, real estate, the whole gamut is represented in our industry group. So we're very excited to have you all here. I'm excited today to introduce you to George Sent, who is a managing director with Cascadia Capital. And I have a few opening comments about the terrific team at Cascadia, and then George would like you to give an introduction of yourself as well. Cascadia is really a premier boutique merger and acquisition firm focused in the area of agriculture, beverages, food, and the like, in assisting companies who are looking for strategic partners, merger and acquisition candidates, and other strategic decisions that are being made for those industries. The firm is based in Seattle with large offices in California and Minnesota, and recently merged with First Beverages Capital, which is a firm based in Southern California focused in the alcohol and beverage merger and acquisition space. George comes to the firm to be one of the senior managing directors in the agriculture practice, coming originally, or most recently, I guess, from KeyBank Capital Markets. But George, could you give a brief summary of your background?
Sure. Mike, thanks, and appreciate being with all of you, and appreciate the partnership with Dorsey. We've spent some time together, and it's a wonderful firm, great opportunity to be with you. By background, I would break my career into three chapters. I was a CPA consulting person earlier on in my career after undergrad. I did that for 4 or 5 years, ironically in the technology space. So I have a perspective on technology. I was, I'll date myself, I was late 90s, doing a lot of ERP implementation work and such, management consulting for a firm that no longer exists, Arthur Andersen in Chicago, and as I mentioned, a CPA as well. I had the good fortune of going to business school out east at Cornell, which has been a phenomenal connection, not intended, but phenomenal connection for me to the food space, as that school has a great food science program, and I'm actually tied in as an advisory board member to the food science school. Had a fateful opportunity after working at Goldman Sachs out east for 3 years to come back to Ohio, where I'm from. I ran corporate finance and investor relations for the Smucker Company, so I was a corporate person for 3 to 4 years. Worked with two of the CEOs, co-CEOs, Tim and Richard Smucker, who are family members, fourth generation, running a public company. And in my early 30s, had a unique opportunity to run investor relations and then corporate finance, which was analysis and sort of more rigor around decision making for that public company. I've always been an advisor and service provider to different types of clients. I missed that work, and so 12 years ago, came back into investment banking, have spent time at places like B of A and Lazard, and then, as you mentioned, most recently was running M&A for food and beverage at KeyBank back in Ohio. My wife and I moved back to Ohio 5 years ago. I found Cascadia to have a really compelling platform, a partnership which is unique in today's banking environment, and this deep understanding of food and beverage and agribusiness, which I could plug into and hopefully be helpful in building a practice or continuing to build a practice in. So excited, again, as I said, excited to be with you, and very interested in talking about agribusiness today.
Terrific. Well, thank you for that great introduction, and so fun to watch, by the way, some good friends logging in. So thank you all for participating, and again, a reminder, please ask questions through the course of the presentation today. So, George, you've kind of already answered to some degree my first major question, which is why pick this topic? And as you indicated from your own background, you've had a unique kind of merger yourself between starting out in technology, now in food and beverage, and seeing some of the changes that have happened in the industry. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen through the course of your career as far as the pace of technological change?
Sure, yeah. As it relates to food and beverage and agribusiness, a significant level of adoption. And I think, we have some slides that talk about the macro environment and this sort of global need for high-quality foods and beverages and the logistical sort of interest behind that. But I think what has happened in the last, call it 10, 20 years, is this realization by the industry, and by that I mean the agribusiness industry, that there is a way of leveraging technology to be more efficient. I think there's also been a movement to more professionalization and what I'll call sort of big business in the farming industry through consolidation. And, again, technology enables greater efficiency, greater yield, and, at the end of the day, greater profit. And so we think that technology will continue to be a backbone on which farmers, folks in the agri space rely, to continue to improve their businesses.
Can you talk about the type of changes you've seen as far as technology in your jobs once you started working in the food and agribusiness industry? And I guess kind of specifically within that, what have been the impacts as far as strategy at those companies?
Sure, yeah. So I think, each situation is unique, but generally what we see is folks continuing to look for better ways of doing, or going through their processes. And in some cases, we talk a little bit about this in the slides, it is different ways of planting, different ways of fertilizing, different ways of thinking about the crop and where the crop should be located, to the extent that the farming organization is able to think about geography. I think there's this macro issue sometimes with certain geographies around weather, or if I think about California, it might be lack of available water or the ability to keep the crops growing. And we consistently hear, and this ebbs and flows, but we consistently hear about crop owners in California that may not get their ration of water, and so that can be a source of frustration. And so folks are continuing to look at various geographies. In terms of the actual implementation or use of technology, what this has spawned is some interesting startup technologies, whether it's crop picking or decision science. We'll talk about in the presentation some of the ERP types of organizations that have grown out of this need for better decision making. And so, Mike, I think it really boils down to there are hardware solutions and there are software solutions that are being created and have been created as a result of this need and, frankly, yearning for greater efficiencies.
I'm struck also by the evolution of connectivity. I've got a good friend who is a dry wheat farmer out in eastern Oregon, and I know the best time to reach him is when he's on the combine, because it's basically a mobile hotspot, and I can catch him that way. So it's fascinating to see how not just the hardware and software, but also the ability to access that information real time has expanded over the recent few years.
I think it goes back to maybe the ubiquity of the technologies in our everyday lives. I think what probably has happened is as mobile devices and to your point, connectivity, be it through a LAN or a hotspot, network, and or just mobile, whether it's 3G, 4G, or now 5G coming on board, have evolved, and we see the power in our daily lives, whether it's sitting at home and being able to surf the web in our family room on an iPad or what have you. There are certainly folks who say, well, this is a great application or a great technology to apply to the work setting, right? And that is not just in an office environment, it is now on the farm. And so we see great extension of these technologies into the industry, and I think we'll continue to see the opportunity as the decision science and the better understanding of data and how the data relates evolves over time.
Well, your comment about better understanding of data is so fascinating to me. And your next slide about the challenge of feeding 9 billion people, you kind of walk through the development pyramid. And what I found so striking about this pyramid was that, first of all, the data and metrics is at the bottom of the pyramid. And we hear a lot about big data in the news media and the like. But as you illustrate, having that information is very far away from achieving wisdom that involves that information. Can you talk a little bit about the pyramid?
Sure, happy to. So where I would start on the pyramid is frankly at a point below the data line, and that is this notion of convincing folks that the data and gathering the data is or was important. So if you were a farmer, let's say you're a large industrial farmer, a major operation, and you had heard about collecting data 10 years ago or 15 years ago, the first step was, okay, how do I collect it? Where would I need sensors? How would I actually gather this information? And should I actually go through this exercise, or is it, not to be punny, but is it fruitless? So I think the first step is, why would it matter, and is there a path to this information actually, or this data actually being useful? And I think once folks broke through that barrier and realized that the data could actually be turned into valuable information that could then lead to greater profit, then folks made the investment. I think it's, Mike, I think it's actually analogous in some ways to this movement in organic. I think back 15 years ago to when I was running investor relations at Smucker, and we had an organic juice line, and there was, at the very early days of that organic juice line, there was always a question about whether we would have enough organic apple or enough organic raw material. And the issue for the farmer was always, well, should I plant enough organic or will there not be an end market for my product? And if I'm going to shift over from conventional to organic, how do I know that it'll be worthwhile? I think there's an analog there for this data collection process. Folks had to be convinced that it was going to lead to, a greater path for their business. So once those sensors and once that information was collected as data, then the process became, how do you turn that raw data into something that is useful, and that's information. And I think there's a bit of trial and error and sort of taking that baseline piece of data and seeing how it should be applied. We'll talk a little bit later, but how it should be applied to some of the decision parameters around the crops. So how much fertilizer, how much water, et cetera. What is the soil content? And so that data then could be transferred into good information. And then the question becomes, once you have the information and you have a sense for how all of it relates, how does that impact, and we call it the knowledge bucket, but how does it impact my decision making and my strategic process over some time period, right? So actually applying it to the business in some more sophisticated way. And then, finally, the I'll call it nirvana is wisdom. And I think wisdom comes from attaching some of these data streams, and frankly, in an open source environment, if folks are collaborating, my data can be shared with you, yours with me, and we're in different geographies. I'm in the Midwest, you're in the Northwest. How does this decision set or set of data across different areas help us optimize an entire network? And then repeating that process year after year. And I think wisdom comes with some time frame and some trial and error. And there's probably, just to sprinkle it in, there's probably some AI or artificial intelligence that, over time starts to optimize the decision making just because you've gone through several decision sets over time. So,
it's fascinating that we could probably spend an hour on this slide alone. I had some kind of interesting questions. One was that it sounds like we're at a bit of a tipping point, in the same way that with organic you needed to have a balance, as Stephen Covey would have said in the 7 Habits book, a balance between production need and production capacity.
Yeah.
And that we're kind of at that tipping point now in regards to the collection process. Is that fair to say?
I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right. And this may evolve over time, but I think as we stand today, that's true.
And then you mentioned in the investment segment that you envision the precision farming industry being a $240 billion market by 2050. That's an eye-popping number. And what is the precision farming industry that would comprise? Yeah,
so the precision farming is essentially and it's a term widely used, but to sort of put it in layman's terms, I would call it this combination of traditional farming methods with this more sophisticated, in quotation marks, sophisticated decision science support. And so, whether it's, again, I would break it down into hardware and software, but this ability to leverage some of the new technologies and intellectual properties that have been developed to optimize, what might be a traditional farming process.
Now, as you talk about collecting more information and the importance of that, can you talk to the challenges that are overcome through the use of the technology?
Yeah, some of these are man-made challenges, I should say, and some of these are challenges that are governed by Mother Nature. But I think one of the slide that we have that shows the evolution to an optimal yield, I think highlights where you're able to take some of these, and we have 6 dimensions, but some of the challenges that a farming operation may face, and where decision making and data science may be helpful. So if you think about seed, fertilizer, agrochemicals, this ever-present Mother Nature, weather, some of the field and soil characteristics, there are challenges in each of those 6 dimensions that an operation has to think about daily. What the technologies allow for is, again, a measurement through data collection, a constant monitoring for theoretical optimal level in each of those dimensions. Some controlled and some uncontrolled. We can't control weather, but we can get a sense, and it's funny, even through our phone apps, we have a sense for whether it's going to rain this week or not. And I think the decision science and the sort of man-made intervention can be regulated around that. So if we know it's going to rain this week, we may not actually put additional water on the crops. So there's this ability to turn, I was thinking about this, these are 6 dials. There's ability to sort of move some of these dials throughout a crop season to at least get close to a theoretical optimization. And I think that's where the technology is helpful. The sensors and gathering of data allow us to hone in on what should theoretically be the most efficient yield.
I was looking at this slide, especially this component on the right-hand side, the optimal yield component, and it struck me that first of all, the items on the kind of upper half, seed, fertilizer, and agrochemicals, are the ones within the producer's control, and then weather, field characteristics to some degree, and soil, the ones on the bottom, really aren't. But by understanding the interdependencies of those, then you can decrease the cost and either optimize or get closer to optimization of the yield, is what this seems to be saying. Is that
I think that's
fair?
Exactly right. Yeah.
And as we talk through, a big part of the evolution here is understanding the return on investment proposition, right? So using your organics example, if I'm a farmer and I'm going to take the process, it takes a lot of time to move from a non-organic to organic, which means there's a cost associated with that, and I need to know, am I going to have a higher return that's going to warrant that cost, right? And so in the area of technology, it also involves a fair amount of costs and needing to understand, how do I get the value out of that? Can you kind of talk through here how not only how the benefits, explain what the charts mean, but also how that's been presented to the people in the decision chain to help them make the decision.
Sure. Yeah. So I think, again, if I go back historically, some of this is a leap of faith. And I think what often happens is there are leaders in industries, in this case in the agribusiness industry, who are willing to, they saw the vision, they saw the opportunity for the technology, and they were willing to invest behind it. And often, it is the larger enterprise, be it a Cargill or some of the others that we mentioned throughout the presentation, who are of scale, who are looking for that extra, I'll call it the extra inch to improve profitability, and they're on the cutting edge of maybe some of the latest techniques or technologies that might gain that extra inch. And so, then what happens, I think, is the larger enterprise sees the opportunity, the technology trickles down, and then it becomes, ubiquitous and sort of standard. It's the smaller enterprise that really has to sort of wade in carefully, not spend the money, maybe is a little more skeptical, because if they dive in and it doesn't work out, they end up losing a lot. So I think just like any technology adoption, there is a recognition that there's this opportunity. The technology maybe is used elsewhere, or in the case of very specific agribusiness technologies, they've seen how a picker may work, for example, the hardware. And then there's this decision on, do we change to this new technology right away? Do we do half of our crop with the new technology? What sort of disruption does it cause? Again, I use the organic example, and I think it's a good one. That's a 3-year process for certain fruits, and I think most fruits. To sit idle as you're letting a conventional crop go to organic, I should say, is a significant investment. And I think the same is true of these technologies. Folks want to make sure that their investment will pay off, and sometimes, especially with something that is very cutting edge, it takes a little while to get there.
It's interesting. I had a couple of observations on the graphic. One was that the digital platform-based value chain really helps address some of the challenges in working up through the pyramid that we talked about in the earlier slide. As you described, to get to the wisdom level requires a level of collaboration among the various participants, which, of course, the lawyer says that could be antitrust problems and the like. Yeah. You also have challenges just from a pure competitive perspective of, will people really share that information? But by having a digital platform or some layer that kind of sits there between the other players and the grower, it gives the opportunity to have at least a benchmarking so that you would know if I'm a corn or soy farmer, soybean farmer, how are my yields comparing to others, not just based on what I hear at the feed store, but actually based on the empirical data that's being presented to me, and are my fields developing similar yield compared to benchmarks and the like. So it solves quite a few problems.
Yeah, and I think to your point, certain markets have transparency, right? If you are traded on an open market, you generally have a sense for how you're doing, and that's helpful. I think technologies such as blockchain could be helpful in this notion of transparency and understanding, maybe what the underlying costs are, or how folks are doing relative to others. And then what's interesting is sometimes the form of organization for the operations can be helpful as well. So I think about your bailiwick of working with co-ops, and what's interesting about the co-op structure from my perspective is this notion of, collaboration and, various entities being part of a broader or under a broader umbrella and sharing best practices and having a sense for, ways of increasing yield or increasing production. And that structure in and of itself is helpful as folks are, moving up the value chain and trying to implement best practices.
So you have some remaining hurdles, and I thought they were really interesting, but in particular, succession issues can result in slow adoption. What do you mean by that?
So it's interesting, and this is not meant to be a broad brush statement, but we do find, especially in certain regions, but frankly across the country, that there are family farming operations, especially, that are going through succession changes, and in some cases, and again, I'll use very general or generalities, but in some cases, you have older generations who have, as we think about the different types of farming operations, have operated under traditional models for decades, and they look at new technologies and they say, while interesting, I'm not interested in adopting these new technologies for the last 10 years of my career. And the flip side is we have some, operations, some clients, folks we work with, where younger generations are taking control of operations and very much interested in pushing technology. And, again, I think about it generally in society. If you're a millennial, the notion of going to a branch bank is unfathomable, and you're using mobile for everything you do. Well, I think the same is true of the farming operation, where the younger generation is saying, gosh, look at all this data and look at the ways we can optimize the business, and they're diving in headlong into the opportunity. So I think, succession issues can, cause certain operations not to use technology to their greatest effect.
It's interesting because it correlates to the previous bullet point there that, with a larger capital investment, that means that the break-even horizon is longer, whether it's moving to organic or other large cost factors. You need to know that you're going to be in the game for that long. So to realize the cost savings or profit increase that you might generate.
Yes, I think that's right.
I loved the example that you used as a Washingtonian. Obviously, we're proud to be in one of the Apple capitals of the United States, a couple of those capitals around the U.S., but we definitely have it here. And, I've personally seen through farms here that, we've had some interesting changes, whether it's, from fairly straightforward things like trellising the trees to changing the way that the harvest occurs and the technology that's used in that. Can you kind of walk through in the tree fruit crop area the example?
Sure, yeah, and I think you're right. There are various technologies that can be implemented, and we just talk about, this notion of, as you said, there's trellising, there are picking, technologies that can be used for actually harvesting the fruit. There's certainly this whole, and I go back to my comment about food science, there's this whole notion of, genetic focus on the various varieties. We were actually with a grower in the Northwest recently, and they were talking about the various varieties of apples that they're looking at and they're actually developing. And then there's not only developing the variety, the new varietal, but then there's the notion of marketing it and sort of creating a market for it. So, there's a significant, in this little case study, we talk about, some of the challenges, and certainly labor, and again, this is, your bailiwick, Mike, but this, this notion of labor costs and some of the other environmental requirements for the crop putting pressure on the grower. And then, there's this notion of technology and adoption of various opportunities creating a mitigant and frankly creating an even more optimal operation. And so, we continue to see folks adopting and thinking about, ways in which robotics and other sorts of technologies can answer some of the, the concerns that are facing. And this is in the Northwest, and it's on the West Coast, but it's also throughout our country. I mean, it extends to the Midwest, where we're working with various farming operations, and even out to the Northeast for various crops.
It's interesting, what we're finding in many of our clients is that it's not just the labor cost, but also the labor availability.
Yeah.
That it's just literally hard to find, in some cases, things you wouldn't have expected. For example, in the central coast of California, they've had a real increase in wine production, which means an increase in grapes. The challenge is that the harvest season for grapes also coincides with some of the harvest season for leafy green. And so because the grapes are being picked before, it means there's a gap where it's literally just difficult to find people to do the work. So necessity is the mother of invention, as they say, and we're definitely seeing necessity out there.
Yeah, no, I think that is absolutely an issue. It's a concern. If I think about the economic chain, if then you're able to find help or find that those human resources for your production, you may be paying more to lock in their services, which then ends up again either putting pressure on margin or it ripples through to a more expensive product for the consumer. So I think these are some of the dynamics that the grower farmer are thinking through.
So the next 3 slides really talk about kind of today, tomorrow, and into the future, and the types of players that are in the market today, how those players are going to evolve in the near-term future and then in the longer-term future for what you predict. And if you could talk first just to explain to the audience, what are the 3 or 4 different types of things that you're talking about here? Ag, ERP, precision ag, traditional ag.
Yeah, so we've given you quite a broad spectrum here of different players. At a very high level, I would call Ag ERP, the group on the left circle, to be those companies that are involved in decision science for the agricultural industry. So for fun, if you Google Cropzilla and look at their website, they're providing all sorts of decision science tools and help for the grower farmer. And it's really actually quite interesting as you navigate to see all of the support and interesting capabilities that they have. I think to your point earlier, if you were to call your friend as he's on the combine, he probably can run any of these Ag ERP systems off of his iPad as he's sitting on the combine, which is interesting. The precision ag.
What's the kind of information that an Ag ERP system would provide you? So my friend on the combine, for example, what would he be looking for there?
Yeah. So again, there's a bit of this information is only so good as its underlying data. But assuming that the data is there that he would supply to the Ag ERP system, so Cropzilla, he may find a scheduling system for the right types of fertilizer and times that he should be applying fertilizer to the crop, or some sort of feed that says here's what it's like the old Farmer's Almanac, but in modern day terms, where he might be provided timing and sort of recommendations on when to apply water to the crop or what have you. So, it's essentially a dashboard for some of his decision making for his business over some time series.
So I see that there's a lot of overlap between Ag ERP and Precision Ag. What's different about Precision Ag?
And again, we talked a little bit about this earlier. The Precision Ag group would really be those folks that are taking agriculture and combining traditional methods with, this more sophisticated, more advanced decision science over the last, call it, decade. And really it could go back more than a decade, but I'll use that time frame. What's interesting, Mike, is we group some of the folks into traditional agriculture like Dow and Cargill and others. There's definitely a morphing of their businesses into precision ag. I mean, I consider, for example, Cargill, and I say this not because I'm in Minneapolis today and I'm around the corner, but a lot of these traditional agriculture producers are using very sophisticated methods and using a lot of these systems. So as much as they're listed as traditional, there's a blending or a morphing into that central circle over time.
And then, traditional ag seems, given that it's traditional, we probably understand, what that means. And then you have also large diversified software. Why do you include that as a separate category?
So what we see with this group, and these are the folks that are creating what I would call traditional ERP systems, enterprise resource systems, decision science systems, etc. But folks who have traditionally been, I'll call it industry agnostic, right? So if you look at this list of IBM and Oracle and Sage and SAP and Google and, frankly, you could even include a group like Salesforce. They are traditionally creating solutions that may, with a baseline system, get tailored for an industry, but they're just interested in creating great information systems across any and all industries. And what we'll talk about in the additional slides that we've included is the morphing of these traditionally industry agnostic players into focused agribusiness solutions providers for our industry. They're no longer just interested in creating general systems. They're actually going to focus more on our industry over time, we think.
So the first step in the evolution here, you've identified as a migration towards one category of end-to-end solutions. Why do you see that migration as being the way that things are going to go?
I think you put it well. Necessity is the mother of invention, and I think what has happened over time is not only has the thesis been proven out that technology is a great enabler for agribusiness, but we also think it is absolutely required in order to remain competitive and in order to, be effective in the marketplace. So if you are a traditional agro producer and you're not using technology today in some sense, whether it's hardware or software, you will fall behind. You will not, as we talked about, you won't benefit from maybe the potential for open source collaboration. And so there will be a migration to, this sweet spot between traditional agro processes and this use of technology over time.
It's interesting. We found, just by way of example, two different examples actually. One, several years ago, I'd say 2 years ago, we started to do some presentations on the use of drones generally and drones in agriculture specifically, because there are a variety of ways that drone use is regulated. You have issues involving the FAA, issues involving confidentiality of information, privacy, data privacy, trespass, a whole bunch of different things. And we've sold out those programs. So a tremendous amount of interest in agribusiness, particularly of how to use drone technology to increase profitability on the farm. And then last week, you were a presenter again, thank you, at our Food Safety Summit. Your presentation was fantastic. And we also had a program on blockchain. And coincidentally, the same week, Walmart announced that they were going to require their leafy green producers, both lettuce and spinach, to adopt a blockchain program within the next 2 years. And you're seeing drivers here really pushing and demanding use of technology. If you're going to have a blockchain tracing mechanism, then you need to have some adopted technology, literally from farm to the table, to be able to enable that blockchain to operate.
I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's very true.
And then, can you talk a little bit about how this migration is going to be happening? Is it going to be happening through investment, merger and acquisition? If you're a large traditional ag company, is it better to acquire software than to try and develop yourself? What do you see and recommend?
Yeah, so Mike, I think it is all of the above. And for each organization, there may be an appetite for any of those three paths. And for each organization, there may be an appetite for all three. So, the most sophisticated organizations look at what I'll call a buy, build, and, potentially partner strategy, right? So they may look at technologies if they're big enough, and they may say, we'd love to acquire that technology and make it a part of what we do. They may internally look to build something, and in some cases that may include having a venture fund and making a very early stage investment in something and then assuming it. And then they may also look at a partnership. And again, this is where I think our industry is fairly collaborative, and often you'll find two organizations that say, you have a technology that I like, and I'd love to sort of license it or partner with you on it. And you see that across all industries, but I think the agribusiness is particularly good at that. And so I think that in all cases, organizations are looking at these various opportunities to either use M&A as a tool to grow. I often say it's an extension of your strategy. It's not the strategy itself. So I think M&A is a tool to either buy a technology or to grow, in some cases where you're buying an entire business. But I think there are other ways of folding in technologies into the operation.
It's an interesting dynamic, and obviously some notable exceptions with a variety of companies, but it's often hard to incubate something that's a true innovation from within a traditional organization, because there are so many steps, so many stakeholders that need to be consulted and the like. As they say, soup by committee is very difficult to cook.
Yeah, and we talk about this in the broader food industry as well. I think there are also some cultural barriers. Often if an organization is well established, and in some cases we're talking about very big companies, the notion of being creative and innovative within a part of the organization works, but you don't have a lot of folks in traditional parts of a company, going out on a limb and trying new things, let's say, within the finance organization, because that just doesn't work. And so I think culturally sometimes the larger organization struggles with, being innovative, and inevitably what that means is failing sometimes. And so letting that sort of activity happen at a smaller incubated operation, or sometimes even outside of the larger organization, works better. And then once an idea is proven out, then it can be potentially brought in-house.
It's one of the interesting dynamics sometimes is that your innovation competes with other core businesses of the company. For example, here, if I work for a agricultural supplier and through technology we can focus the use of that thing that we're supplying, then our sales drop potentially. And so there are some internal barriers to making an investment in a technology that would make other areas of the business slag for at least a period of time.
I think that's right. Yeah, I think
the next phase you see happening is that the large diversified software companies moving in to the sweet spot here. And can you talk to why you drop certain segments from the previous slide? So as you look into your crystal ball, you see some major changes through consolidation, it appears. And how does that consolidation happen?
Yeah, so we see this very significant convergence between the different groups. And we see players, and I think we refer earlier to winners. And the notion being that there will be, through either consolidation or, again, just the significant might of some of the operations, where if an IBM wants to, over time, dominate agribusiness decision science, they have the ability to do so. If this is an area of focus for them, they will find a way to win. And they have, you could argue, one of the best artificial intelligence groups, and all the ability, again, to bring those technologies maybe being used in other areas of the economy into agribusiness. And so similarly, we think that, whether it's Google, IBM, some of the other names mentioned here, that they will have the opportunity over the next, call it several decades, to, through mergers, acquisitions, just business growth and organic development, take over at this intersection of decision science and precision ag. The question I have as I look at this slide is just how far would be too far? And again, thinking about regulation and antitrust, does there become a point at which this would be a level of too much consolidation, and would there be an issue, at an antitrust level of having just a concentration of too many dominant players?
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to watch that evolve because obviously the food supply is critical. As we started, the slide starting with 9 billion people need to be fed. There'll be a lot of focus on making sure that food supply is not put at risk somehow. Each of the companies that are in the space now or will be entering have their own challenges and opportunities. Can you talk a little bit about what needs to be overcome for each of these verticals and how you expect they're going to do that, the people who will still be in the market in 15 years?
Sure. Yeah. So, I'll start with the farthest left column, which is the Ag Tech Software Group. At a very high level, I would say there is very specific knowledge of the industry with this group. They're already entrenched. They are a go-to provider for decision science for those that are trying to be part of the precision ag group. These are the solutions providers. The challenge for those in the industry, though, is the issue that I go back to of might, right? So if you're Cropzilla or some of the others we've talked about as an example, you are very niche and specific, and this notion of an end-to-end solution. So if you're a farmer and you have this great decision science ability in your iPad as you're sitting on the combine, but then you have a separate system for your financial package, your financial ERP back at the office, there will be the question over time, should I just go to one solutions provider And again, that's where this thesis of an Oracle or an IBM or some of the bigger players come to mind. And so I think
it's a classic tech dilemma, right?
Yeah.
Innovate but get big fast.
Exactly. And also be relevant to my end market, be an expert in ag, right? And I really know ag well, but in doing so, am I so focused and narrow that eventually if somebody decided to be very good at agriculture as well, but then had the other suite of products, would they end up, knocking me out of the industry? So I think that's the challenge. And, the opportunity, as we list, is can you be so good, we say become a market leader, can you become so good and the sort of gold standard, or could you continue to offer other sorts of products? Could you offer that, general ledger product as well, so that you aren't displaced over time? I would argue that, if you're able to be so good in your niche, maybe the farming operation realizes that they don't want to replace you. My experience, again, having done ERP implementations in the past, is you often get a very vanilla product that has to be customized. And though we think IBM and others could move into this space, it is possible that a smaller player could have a really defined expertise. And so, going back to it, I think, that is sort of the opportunity and challenge for the ag tech software. Large traditional ag has some similar challenges in terms of incorporating technologies and being nimble. And again, we see this for all large companies. Mm-hmm. But they also have the might. And again, if you look at this list, whether it's John Deere, Syngenta, Monsanto, what have you, if they are able to navigate the ability to be nimble and quick moving, they do have access to all of the markets they would need. And then very quickly on the large diversified software side, we talked about the thesis of you have such a broad breadth of software solutions and access to markets globally, by the way. If you decided to move into ag tech in a significant way, you'd have a really nice opportunity to dominate.
So I want to end with this, George, and this is a slide kind of addressing the ag tech investment opportunity that's out there. And I was intrigued in particular with the BCG slide and survey. What was that survey?
Yeah, so it was a survey done a number of years ago by BCG, who's actually, along with McKinsey, very attuned to the trends in the industry, and they create these interesting surveys where they'll go to, say, 1,000 executives in the industry to pull what their greatest concerns are. So these aren't meant to be percentages that would add up to 100%, but rather, what are the top 5 concerns that you have out of a list of 20 that will give you? And so these are number of incidents, where folks listed some of these items as either, their top investment priorities or things they were focused on.
Now, for those who aren't familiar with BCG, that stands for Boston Consulting Group, right?
Correct.
So as we wrap up in the last minute here, if for the participants coming from various different industries, banking, services, large traditional ag, and software companies, what one or two things would you recommend that people do today as a result of the information that they're learning in the program today?
Sure. Yeah. So I think being attuned to the technologies in your industry that are cutting edge and interesting and may improve your business over time is very important. We talk a little bit about the venture funds that folks have set up. I don't think that's necessary per se, but the notion of being tied in either through a fund or through your activities in the industry to the various cutting-edge ways where you may advance your business, to me would be paramount. I think there are so many interesting things going on in the industry and technologies and methods, best practices, and whether that's through an industry organization or, again, through these investment activities, that would probably be, my greatest focus. And, we list big data and analytics as the top concern. I think it's a very similar sort of investment or focus, which is how to leverage the information that is out there on the industry or in the industry to the greatest good and the greatest profit for the organization.
So with that, for the participants, thank you so much for participating in this interesting interactive dialogue on the topic of ag technology, past, present, and future. And if you are interested in getting continuing education credit for this program, you'll be receiving an email both included in the reminder email from yesterday as well, from Michelle Hubble, who is the person who manages those credits for us. So please submit that. Please also submit your feedback. We'll be sending you a short survey on today's program. And we welcome your feedback on this program and also on other topics that you'd find interesting in the industry. So George, thank you so much for your presentation today. How can people kind of stay in touch through Cascadia with what you're seeing in your practice and in the industry?
Yeah, so we do list the email in the presentation. Would be happy to field any and all questions that folks have. I know we ran out of time, it looks like, for questions, Q&A, but would be happy to field any, post the presentation today. And, I would say, Mike, we have a really robust practice along with yours focused on the industry, so happy to help folks think through any of the decision-making process, whether it's M&A or what have you. Bounce ideas off of us on what you're seeing in the industry. We have a lot of conversations, and we're happy to share, best practices with what we're seeing, and frankly, happy to put folks in touch with others in the industry where they may see opportunities.
Terrific. Well, George, thank you, and thanks to all of the participants for today's program.
Great. Thanks, Mike.